Jasmine's chief of staff leaned in and whispered urgently. Don't respond. Let them sort out the procedural matters. But Jasmine was already on her feet. Madam Chair, I'm willing to yield my remaining time if Mrs. Trump would like to address anything I've stated. I stand by every point. The tension in the room increased immediately. Cameras that had been casually recording shifted their focus. Producers in newsrooms recognized what was unfolding. This moment was about to dominate the day's coverage. Melania stepped toward the podium, her heels echoing across the marble floor. She lowered the microphone slightly, then looked directly at Jasmine. You speak about healthcare challenges and the difficulties people face. Melania began, her tone steady. But you overlook what my husband's administration achieved. You create a narrative that dismisses the progress we made. Jasmine felt the familiar frustration that arose whenever Trump allies attempted to reshape historical outcomes. With respect, Mrs. Trump, I reference verified statistics from the Congressional Budget Office. 27 million Americans lost or nearly lost coverage due to policies implemented during. Statistics can be manipulated, Melania interjected. You select numbers that support your story. You ignore context. This is what politicians do. They distort data. The word distort lingered in the air like a direct challenge. Jasmine tightened her grip on her desk, aware of colleagues watching closely. Some likely hoped she'd step back from confrontation. That wasn't her approach. Mrs. Trump, I do not distort data, Jasmine replied firmly. I provide facts, and the fact is you are young and ambitious. Melania cut in, her tone sharpening. You build your profile by criticizing my family. It is an obvious strategy. A few people in the room gasped. The exchange had become personal. Jasmine inhaled slowly, counting to 3 as her grandmother had taught her. Stay sharp when you're angry. I am not targeting your family, Mrs. Trump, Jasmine said clearly. I am discussing policy outcomes that affected millions of households. If you choose to take that personally, that is your decision. Melania's expression hardened. You mentioned my husband's name 17 times in your remarks. You called his policies cruel and intentionally harmful. Do not pretend this is not personal. Those were descriptions of policy consequences, not personal attacks, Jasmine responded. And yes, I referenced the former president because his administration directly contributed to the healthcare crisis we're examining today. That is not personal. It is relevant. You do not understand what you are talking about, Melania said, her accent deepening as she struggled to maintain composure. You were not present during the meetings, the decisions, the challenges. You sit here with simplified narratives and past judgment. Jasmine sensed a shift in the room. Melania had allowed emotion to show, revealing this wasn't only about policy, but about defending something she felt was under threat. Mrs. Trump, you're correct that I wasn't in those meetings, Jasmine said calmly. But I was in my district speaking with families who couldn't afford insulin, who had to choose between medication and rent, who skipped cancer screenings because they lost coverage. I witnessed the results of those choices you mentioned. With respect, seeing the consequences provides the perspective I need. Melania's jaw tightened. You use people's struggles for political advantage. No, Jasmine replied quickly. I represent those struggles because it's my duty. Elected officials are expected to speak difficult truths even when influential people would prefer silence. The committee chair attempted to intervene. Ladies, perhaps we are not finished, Melania said, her gaze fixed on Jasmine. You want to discuss facts? Then let's address actual facts. She removed a tablet from her bag. An aide connected it to the room's display. What I am about to show is what Representative Crockett has not disclosed. The screens displayed a legislative proposal from 2 years earlier sponsored by Jasmine and 3 other progressive members. This bill, Melania said, pointing at the screen, claims to expand healthcare, but hidden in Section 4, Paragraph 12. It would have removed funding for rural hospital infrastructure. 12,000 jobs lost. You failed to mention this, didn't you? Jasmine felt her anger spike. That provision was added by the Senate during markup. My original bill included entirely different language. Anyone who followed the legislation knows that. But you still voted for the final version. Melania interrupted. You adjust your principles when convenient and claim moral superiority afterward. That is how legislation works, Jasmine replied, her voice rising slightly. Lawmakers negotiate and compromise to pass measures that help people, even if they're not perfect. Unlike certain administrations, I don't have the option to rely on executive orders and bypass Congress. Melania's eyes narrowed. Now your real intentions are visible. This is about my husband. This is about governing, Jasmine corrected, which clearly is something you misunderstand despite spending 4 years in the White House. The room went silent. Even the stenographer paused typing. Melania lowered her tablet slowly. You are out of line. Representative, am I? Jasmine replied. You entered this hearing without invitation to undermine my testimony. You attempted to discredit my work using incomplete information. You accused me of dishonesty and of exploiting suffering. And now you're upset because I'm responding directly. That isn't how this works. I have every right to defend my family's legacy. And I have every right to fulfill my duties without interference from private citizens, regardless of their public profile. Jasmine said, You don't receive special treatment because you once lived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You are no longer the First Lady. Mrs. Trump, you are a private citizen trying to pressure an elected representative. Melania's composure faltered. You think you're courageous and principled, but you know nothing about pressure or sacrifice. I know plenty, Jasmine replied quietly. I understand what it's like to be told to stay silent because my words make others uncomfortable. I know what it's like to speak when powerful people would rather I didn't. And I know the cost of choosing to do what's right. She paused. The difference between us, Mrs. Trump, is that I was elected to speak these truths. The public granted me that authority. No one voted for you. A few people winced. Melania's face went pale, then flushed. How dare you? I'm stating a fact, Jasmine said evenly. Your position was ceremonial and based on marriage. Mine is constitutional and based on democratic choice. These are not equivalent roles, and you cannot treat them as if they are. My husband was elected. Your husband was elected, not you, Jasmine replied. And at this moment, you are using the influence from his past office to pressure someone who was independently elected by her community. That is not defending a legacy. That is attempting to undermine representation. Melania grabbed her tablet, her hands shaking. You will regret this. Is that a threat? Jasmine asked sharply. It is a prediction, Melania said coldly. People like you rise quickly and fall just as fast. You create enemies you cannot manage. Senator Morrison rose from his seat. Representative Crockett, I believe you owe Mrs. Trump an apology. Jasmine turned toward him. For what exactly? For doing my job. For refusing to be quiet. For pointing out that she has no official standing here. For your tone. For your disrespect. My tone. Jasmine felt genuine disbelief. She came here to discredit me, accused me of lying and exploiting people, and suggested I use others' suffering for political gain. Yet I'm expected to apologize for my tone. She looked around the room, making deliberate eye contact with several committee members. This is exactly what we mean when we talk about how women of color are treated in these spaces. We're expected to be quiet, grateful, and apologetic, even when we're attacked, even when we're simply doing our jobs. Melania had returned to her seat but hadn't sat down. She stood tense, gripping her bag until her knuckles whitened. You want to make this about race? She said. Always the victim. I'm making this about power, Jasmine corrected. About who holds it, how they use it, and what happens when someone without your advantages refuses to be intimidated. That's the point. You know nothing about my advantages, Melania snapped. You think because I married well, everything came easy. You think I never worked or faced struggles? I'm sure you had challenges, Jasmine acknowledged. But they didn't include worrying about whether you could afford medication. They didn't include facing eviction because medical bills destroyed your family financially. They didn't include being denied a bank loan because of systemic bias. Your struggles were real, but they weren't the struggles of the people I represent. Melania shook her head. You create divisions. You make everything about categories, rich and poor, white and black. I describe realities, Jasmine replied. There's a difference between creating division and recognizing the divides that already exist. You had access to resources most Americans will never experience. That's not a personal criticism. It's simply factual. And when those resources are used to undermine elected officials who represent people without that privilege, I'm going to call it out. I'm not trying to silence you, Melania insisted, though her presence at the hearing suggested otherwise. Then what exactly are you doing here? Jasmine asked plainly. You requested speaking privileges at a congressional hearing where you have no official role. You brought prepared material aimed at discrediting my work. You accused me of lying and exploiting others in front of cameras and colleagues. If that's not an effort to silence me, what is it? Melania opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how to respond. The committee chair cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a recess. No, Jasmine said firmly. Mrs. Trump asked for this conversation. Let's finish it. She faced Melania again. You said I don't understand what you and your husband accomplished. So tell me specifically, What healthcare achievement should I be recognizing? Melania straightened. We work to lower prescription drug prices. The executive order that was never implemented, Jasmine asked, the one pharmaceutical companies ignored because it had no enforcement. We expanded Medicare. You attempted to cut Medicare by $450 billion, Jasmine corrected. That was in your administration's own budget proposal. I have the documents if you'd like to review them. Melania's face reamed. You twist everything. I'm citing your administration's records, Jasmine replied. If the facts sound bad, perhaps the policies were bad. We gave people choice, Melania said. The freedom to choose their health care. You gave insurance companies permission to offer junk plans that excluded essential services, Jasmine responded. You called it choice. In reality, it allowed companies to sell policies that left people unprotected. I represent constituents who believe they had coverage until they got sick and discovered their low-cost plans covered almost nothing. They should have read the fine print, Melania said, instantly realizing the weakness of her comment. Jasmine didn't hesitate. They should have read the fine print. Mrs. Trump, many of my constituents work multiple jobs just to survive. They don't have time to analyze dense insurance documents written by legal teams. They trusted their government wouldn't allow companies to sell worthless plans. Your husband's administration removed those protections and called it freedom. That isn't governing. That's abandonment. We believed in personal responsibility. Personal responsibility matters. Jasmine agreed. But it can't function in a system stacked against working people. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you can't afford boots. You can't make responsible healthcare choices when every available option is flawed because regulations were stripped away. Personal responsibility requires basic fairness. Your husband's policies eliminated that fairness for millions. Melania glanced around the room, perhaps hoping for support. Senator Morrison looked uneasy. Other Trump allies seemed unsure whether to intervene. You're very good at speeches, Melania finally said. At sounding righteous. But where were you when we tried working with Democrats? We reached out. You demanded full surrender. Jasmine said that's not outreach. That's issuing terms. Real negotiation requires compromise and recognizing the other side's concerns. Your husband's administration never did that. It was his way or no way. And when Democrats refused complete capitulation, he accused them of obstruction. You rewrite history to make yourself the hero, Melania said, raising her voice. I don't need to be a hero, Jasmine replied. I need to be truthful. And truthfully, your husband's health care policies harm people, millions. That isn't opinion. It's documented fact. Coverage dropped, costs increased, rural hospitals shut down, people died because they couldn't afford treatment. Those outcomes are the record. That's the legacy. You cannot blame every problem on one administration. I'm not. Jasmine said health care was broken long before your husband arrived. But instead of improving it, his administration made it worse. And now you expect me to stay silent because acknowledging that offends you. I won't. I can't. The people I represent deserve honesty. Melania grabbed her tablet again, her hands trembling. I have more documents. I don't care, Jasmine said, her voice steady. You can bring 100 documents or 1,000 charts and selectively chosen statistics, but none of them change the basic truth. Your husband's policies hurt people, and I will continue saying so, no matter how it makes you feel. You are disrespectful. I'm honest, Jasmine corrected. And if you can't see the difference, that says a great deal about why your family's legacy is what it is. The room erupted instantly. Morrison yelled about decorum. Other representatives demanded order, and the committee chair was striking his gavel to no effect. Melania didn't move. She kept her eyes on Jasmine with a mix of anger and something close to disappointment. You think you've won something? Melania asked quietly, her voice barely rising above the noise. I don't think I've won anything, Jasmine said in the same low tone. I just did the job I came here to do. The hearing fell apart completely. The chair called for an immediate recess. Melania's security team guided her out through a side door while reporters rushed toward Jasmine, yelling questions. Her chief of staff grabbed her arm. We have to leave. This will be everywhere in minutes. Jasmine nodded. But before she could step away, Senator Morrison blocked her. You just created a very powerful enemy, he warned. Be prepared for what comes next. I'm prepared to represent my district, Jasmine responded. If that means making enemies, so be it. As they moved through the hallways, Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Texts, calls, social media alerts. The moment had already exploded online. Back in her office, her staff watched the news. Every network was looping the footage. Melania's interruption, Jasmine's response, the tense back and forth about policy and legacy. Twitter is overwhelmed, her communications director said. You're the #1 trend globally. What's the reaction? Jasmine asked. Exactly what you'd expect. Your supporters are celebrating you. Trump supporters are demanding consequences. Everyone else is just stunned. Jasmine sank into her chair. I didn't want this to turn into a personal clash. Too late. Her chief of staff said. It already has. Now you need to decide your next steps. Within an hour, interview requests flooded in. Every major outlet wanted her on their evening shows. Print journalists asked for statements. Her social media following jumped by 50,000 in under an hour. This could define your career, her communications director said. Your response matters. Jasmine kept watching the footage the moment she stood her ground and refused to be pushed aside. Book interviews only with people willing to discuss policy, she said. Not just the confrontation, the healthcare issues I came to address. Jasmine, her chief of staff, cautioned, nobody is focused on policy right now. Then we make them focus, she insisted. That's the entire point. By evening, she had completed 3 TV interviews and 1 radio segment. Each time, reporters pushed to make the story about her conflict with Melania. Each time, Jasmine turned the conversation back to policy. Mrs. Trump says, you were disrespectful. One anchor noted. I was direct. Jasmine said. There's a difference, and the healthcare crisis affects over 40 million Americans. That requires directness. Do you feel you crossed the line? Telling the truth about harmful policies is never crossing a line. If powerful people find honesty disrespectful, that's their issue, not mine. Around 8 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Representative Crockett, she answered. Good evening, said a composed voice. This is Margaret Chin from the Trump Organization. Mrs. Trump would like to invite you to meet privately. Jasmine's stomach tightened. For what purpose? To continue your conversation in a calmer setting. To find common ground. Common ground on what? On issues you both care about. Healthcare, public service, the country's future. Jasmine nearly laughed. Miss Chin, please tell Mrs. Trump she may contact my office directly if she wants a policy discussion. I'm not interested in private meetings about what I should or shouldn't say publicly. Mrs. Trump simply wants. I know exactly what she wants. Jasmine cut in. She wants to manage the narrative quietly. I'm not part of that. If she has policy ideas, she can share them through the appropriate channels. But I won't be silenced and I won't be handled. She hung up before Chin could continue. Her chief of staff exhaled. You just turned down a meeting with a Trump. I declined a meeting designed to shut me up. Jasmine corrected. There's a difference. Later that night, scrolling through social media, she saw the full impact. Thousands of comments, dozens of columns already posted. Video clips circulating everywhere. Some called her brave, others called her reckless. Some criticized her approach, others praised her honesty. But beneath the noise were messages from constituents and people far beyond her district. Messages of thanks, stories about failed healthcare systems, notes from people saying they finally felt represented. Keep fighting. One person wrote, You spoke truth to power. Another said, Don't stop. Jasmine put down her phone and stared at the ceiling. She remembered Melania's expression when she'd said, Nobody voted for you. It may have been blunt, even harsh, but it had been true. And truths she'd learned long ago was worth defending, even when it came with consequences, even when it angered powerful people, even when silence would have been easier. The next morning brought fresh challenges. 3 major donors withdrew their support, claiming she had been overly confrontational. 2 colleagues from competitive districts asked to publicly distance themselves from her. A think tank canceled a planned event. This is the backlash. Her chief of staff said, This is what happens when you confront someone with her influence. But there was another side. Small donations poured in from across the country. Grassroots organizations offered support. Women of color in Congress called to back her. You did what needed to be done. Congresswoman Porter told her. Don't let anyone make you regret it. Then came the unexpected call from President Biden's team. The president supports your right to speak openly about health care policy. The aide said he believes strong advocacy is essential. It was diplomatic but meaningful. By the end of the week, the story shifted. Melania released a statement calling Jasmine's conduct unprofessional and claiming she had simply been correcting inaccuracies. Jasmine issued her own response. 3 pages of source data outlining healthcare outcomes under the Trump administration. She didn't mention Melania by name. She simply presented facts. The media called it receipts. Supporters called it truth. Critics called it doubling down. Jasmine called it her responsibility. Senator Morrison attempted to censure her for misconduct during the hearing. The motion failed narrowly. Party lines held mostly firm with a few Republicans opposing censure. "You forced them to take a stand," her chief of staff said. "Now everyone knows who supports your right to speak and who doesn't." A month later, a package arrived at her office. Inside was a book on healthcare policy. The inscription read, "For Representative Crockett, who understands that speaking truth requires courage. Keep fighting." It was signed by Michelle Obama. Jasmine held the book and realized something had changed, not only in her career, but in the larger national discussion. More lawmakers were now speaking openly about healthcare. More journalists were covering substantive policy instead of drama. More citizens were paying attention. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Baby, I saw everything," her mother said. "I'm proud of you. You didn't let them silence you." "It cost me some things," Jasmine admitted. "It always does," her mother said. "But some things are worth the cost. And speaking truth is always worth it." Jasmine looked at Michelle Obama's book, the letters from constituents, and the policy drafts on her desk. "Yeah," she whispered. "It is." In the end, that was what it came down to. Not the confrontation, not the viral clips, not the political backlash, but the question of whether she would do her job, represent her people, speak uncomfortable truths, and challenge power when necessary. Melania Trump had attempted to quiet her using influence, resources, and lingering authority from her years in the White House. She had tried to pressure, dismiss, and shape the narrative. Jasmine responded with what mattered most: facts, principles, and the firm belief that her voice and the voices of those she served deserved to be heard. She hadn't claimed victory. She had simply refused to lose herself. And sometimes that was the only victory that truly counted.